what about the actual evidence to the resurrection stuff? So let's start with this. You've examined dozens or probably hundreds of crime scenes. Right. So you know when somebody's dead or when they're not dead. How do we actually know Jesus died the way the Gospels describe it by crucifixion?
Yeah, that's always I think an important. For me, I had a couple of ways of explaining the resurrection as an atheist. That either they were wrong about him being dead, he just comes back from being badly beaten and he passes out, maybe he appears to be dead, but he's not really dead. That was one possibility. But as you read through the account, you get little pieces of hidden science that after you've worked homicides and assaults, you begin to say, well, I actually think this looks like my casework. So, for example, there's a scene in the Gospel of John where John describes the thieves on the cross with Jesus, right?
Okay.
And he says the two of the three people who were crucified at the same time, the thieves, are still alive at the end of the day, and they have to break their legs in order to expedite their execution, right? Well, why wouldn't I think that all three are still alive? How is it that three are hung at the same time, yet only two are alive, and this one's supposed to be, maybe he's not dead. That's why the suspicion was there for me to begin with. But there's a piece of hidden science in that passage because it says that the guard came and stabbed Jesus in the side and blood and water came out of his body, and they saw the separation of blood and water. And I thought, I recognize that because there's an attribute that occurs when you suffer cardiac arrest. It's called effusion. Okay. And either the water builds up around your heart or it builds up in your lungs, depending on your body placement. You have to have that kind of shock, circulatory shock, and cardiac arrest to get that kind of effusion. And at coroners, I've been to autopsies where coroners will actually show me what this looks like. So I think in the end, that's a piece of hidden science because if they stabbed that side of Jesus' body and they saw the separation of water, that's probably pleural effusion from his lungs. But that means he'd have to be dead in order to show you that kind of separation of water.
And John didn't know what he was describing.
Well, it's not only did
Luke, who was the doctor.
Well, get this, John didn't know it, and I don't even think that Luke knew it based on what he knew back in the day. Here's why I say that. If you read the earliest readers of Scripture, which are the church fathers, like Origen and Tertullian, Jerome, these people were writing about that scene in the Gospel of John, and when they got to the separation of blood and water, they said it's got to be some kind of a metaphor or something, right?
Kind of
it's like it's got to be the water baptism it symbolizes. It must symbolize something because it can't be water that came out of him. Why in the world would water? Everyone in the first 500 years cannot understand what the water is. And I don't think John understood it either, unless John's so clever that he writes in this.
Of course.
that he's going to put this little secret that no one's even going to understand medically for 1,000 years, hoping that someday when they discover it, it makes him look legitimate. So I had a problem with that. When I first read that and did that investigation, I thought, okay, what I know as a homicide detective, I'm pretty convinced that Jesus was dead.
Interesting. Now, I know there's even other evidence that Jesus died from sources like outside, like Tacitus and Josephus. But just examining the Scriptures, that was compelling evidence.
Think about this. For you and I mean, if you're not in the job that I'm in, how many times do people touch dead bodies in their regular day? Not very often. And if your family members died, you wouldn't be wrapping them up to get them ready for burial. But in the first century, you took care of your own. You couldn't call the funeral home. You couldn't call a coroner. These things didn't exist. You wrapped up your own dead for burial. So we don't understand what the signs of death are. There's actually a triad. There's three things that happen when your heart stops pumping. It's called the mortis triad. And what happens is, number one, you start to cool down. So if you've got a dead body, the hot blood is not circulating through their body anymore, they will feel cooler to the touch. So I can't imagine you could manipulate Jesus' body as much as they say they did and not notice the decrease in temperature. Two, though, you start to get stiff. So one's called algor mortis, the second one is called rigor mortis, right? You start to get stiff. Now, we might not think about that, but they would certainly have noticed it. And the last one is really called liver mortis, and it's that you start to discolor based on where the blood settles. You see this bruising when you go to any death scene. I've seen it so many times. And that's something you can't really miss. So I just can't imagine they would miss the mortis triad. You and I don't overthink about it.
They knew when a body was dead
when someone... Maybe they're just hallucinating this. You know, they wanted it so bad. They felt bad that Jesus died. They thought he was the Messiah. They just imagined it was Jesus. Remember Mary? She's in the garden tomb, right? And she sees the gardener. Oh, no, it's not the gardener. It's Jesus. No, Mary, you knucklehead. It's a gardener. You just want it to be Jesus, so you've imagined it to be Jesus. Even in some of these early reports, it seems that Jesus looks slightly different, right? I mean, Peter's by himself in at least two of the accounts. He sees Jesus. He just wants him to be alive. I get it. You want it bad enough. There's nobody else there. Sure, you can imagine anything. I mean, the same is probably true for James. He felt bad about how he treated him when he was alive. He's by himself, at least in one account, and so he might have seen something he thought was true when it wasn't true. Then you get someone, though, like Saul, right? On the road to Damascus, of the people on the road with him, he's the only one who sees Jesus. But do you think he wants it to be Jesus? That's what's driving him? He wants Jesus to be alive because he feels bad? I don't think that's true for him. So why is he seeing this? Then it gets weirder, right? More than one person at the same time having the same exact vision. Think about that. If I told you I had a dream, right? And I tell you the details of my dream. I'm driving a red Tesla down, what's a good street here? Valley View. And you said, yeah, I was there. I know what you're talking about. You were in a red Tesla, right? Yeah. And it was a rag top, right? Like a convertible, tan rag top. The top was down. How would you know that? If you could tell me part of my dream, that would freak me out because we don't have group dreams, right? So if you know my dream, it's probably not a dream at all. It's probably a memory. There are people who saw Jesus who were in groups. 2 here on the road to Emmaus reported it for years afterwards. 3 Marys at the tomb again, right? All 3 see the same thing. How's that happening? There are 7 people at the lake who together saw the same thing. I couldn't even get them all on the same screen. I got most of them. Here's 2 more over there. There you go. And then you have that group that minus Thomas. Thomas is not in the room. But you have the other, it's the 10. It's no Thomas and no Judas. But you have the other 10 disciples, all who see the risen Christ. How do you explain a group dream of 10? It's just too weird, right? And then you have Thomas returning. And with Thomas present, you have 11. 11 people. These groups are getting bigger. Now, I'm not sure that on the mountaintop there could be more than 11. We know at least there were the 11. But it says the disciples of Jesus. Not sure if that's just the apostles or the apostles plus all the other disciples. They all saw Jesus on the mountaintop. Not even sure how many, but it's at least 11. And then they have this one scene that to me is so powerful, right? Jesus is about to ascend into heaven. He's surrounded by his disciples. I don't even know how large this group is, but it's at least the 11. And for a lot of us, if we say we got to see a miracle before we'll believe, I bet you if you were in that crowd that day and you weren't even a believer and you saw Jesus rise into the air, you would have become a believer. Right? Would you agree? Okay. There's some people in this room right now who are not believers. Did you know that? If you could see Jesus rise into the air, you would become a believer too, I bet. You want to see it? I can show it to you. You ready? Here we go. Get ready. This is a life-changing experience. Here it comes. Whoop. Now, I suspect we should have a room full of believers. At least 11 there. And then we have one scene where there's 500 people on the same day who saw Jesus rise from the dead. They saw him alive after his execution. How do we explain this? I can't even count all these. I'll try to count these for you real quick. There's a bunch of these folks here. I got them all in there. I got them all accounted for. Plus a few more. There we go. Now we're good to go. Now, of course, if this is just a vision and they're wrong about this, they're mistaken about this, there's a way to prove they're wrong. Just run back to the tomb, because this is a vision, and only a vision, there should be a body in the tomb. But that's the problem. The tomb is empty. So what do we do with this? This is why Peter says, guys, we're not making this stuff up, okay? We just saw it. I don't care if you like it or not like it. I get it that it's weird, but we just saw it with our own eyes. We touched it. We saw him. What can you do? We ate with him. We're just reporting what we saw. So is it possible that they were having a group vision? Well, it's certainly not reasonable.